Aloha aina, ano ai, velina kako. Welcome to Free Hawaii News, brought to you by the Koani Foundation, presenting Hawaiian perspectives on a broad range of topics and issues affecting the Hawaiian Islands, the Pacific, and the world. Your hosts for Free Hawaii News are Leon Kaulahau-Siu, musician, composer, diplomat, and political analyst, and Hinaleimoana Wong, Kumuhula, filmmaker, cultural and Hawaiian language preservationist, and community leader. And now, Free Hawaii News.
Ano ai me ke aloha ia kākoa pauloa, hau oli makahiki ho.
Hau oli makahiki ho.
Ai, aloha mai oa uno o Hinaleimoana, Wong Kalu.
And I am Leon Kaulahau-Siu, and we're really pleased to have you here in this brand new year to enjoy this new year of Free Hawaii News.
Mahalo anu ia o no ko oko ki pa ana mai, ho'one nea mai ana mako no e kukala ku I ka nuho o ke iao.
January 2023. This is a very special year, and we have some observances this year that we're going to be talking about, particularly the one that occurred on January 17th, 1893. This is the 130th anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and it's such a significant date, and it's something that we really need to pay attention to, because this is the focal point as well as the pivot point of what happened with us and where we're going as we work to restore our nation, as we work to free Hawaii.
As people reflect on this, the year of the 130th observance of the overthrow of our kingdom, we reflect upon great loss. We reflect upon loss of the ability to govern ourselves and our affairs, and that includes all that happens on our islands and on our shores. And so truly this time of observance brings to mind that here, 130 years later, our Hawaiian people are still in quite a grave plight, if we would be so bold to say, because our conditions for health and for economic prosperity, as well as political governance over our affairs and our natural resources, we are not the ones controlling this in Hawaii, and there is much that we need to do. So this is a call out really to all of our lahui. And not only is it a call to Kanaka, but this is a friendly request to other kama'aina, other people who are born here in Hawaii but not necessarily ethnically Hawaiian, as well as malihini haole, who find themselves now here on the shores of our islands. It is up to each and every one of us to think about this place that we live in and to really consider, what does it mean to live in Hawaii yet Hawaiian ways, culture, language, and history are still not the prevalent and dominant presence in Hawaii.
Prior to that, Hawaii was a very prosperous and happy kingdom. We were a sovereign nation recognized by all the sovereign countries of the world as a sovereign, as well as being a very progressive nation. We had many things that we started here that are, for instance, our education was non-parallel. In other words, there was no other place that had the type of education system we had. And our literacy rate was extremely high. It was up in the mid-90s, so about 95% literacy rate. So it was a peaceful kingdom. It was a very progressive kingdom. It was a very well-educated populace of the kingdom. But in 1893, due to two factors, one was the sugar planters who had gotten extremely wealthy and greedy during the second half of the 19th century, and they were looking to actually secure a better market, to secure the U.S. as a better market for their sugar. And so they wanted to overthrow the kingdom in order to take control of the government so they could negotiate a better marketing arrangement with the United States. on the other side, the United States had been coveting our islands, particularly Pearl Harbor, as a possible military outpost, a naval base, so that they could expand their influence into the Western Pacific and to Asia. So the United States and these group of insurgents colluded, and they cooked up this scheme to take over the Hawaiian Kingdom, that the insurgents would have a coup d'etat. They would overthrow the government, but the United States military would back them, their armed forces. So on cue, the military landed on a certain day on December 16th, and on December 17th, the insurgents announced that they were now in charge of the kingdom. Of course, with the presence of the United States military in front of the palace, the Queen basically decided to yield temporarily, that is, to not provoke a war to take place, because if that happened, we would be completely wiped out, knowing the behavior of the U.S. and their armed forces against the Native Americans that they had just decimated. So the Queen basically felt that diplomatic means would be much better to use than to try to repel the invaders. So she decided to tell her people to stand down, and they would settle this diplomatically. It was actually a brilliant call because, one, she saved our people from being killed, but secondly, she actually did the right thing by putting our situation into the hands of international law. And that's why today we are working under international law with the knowledge that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists because our Queen reserved that right and never abandoned our country. And our country was never extinguished because of what she did and because of what the people of Hawaii did at that time, when they rallied around their Queen, supported their Queen, and opposed annexation. And even though that annexation went ahead and proceeded with the United States by United States force, our people had put up enough of a fuss and had stood their ground to say, no, we're not Americans, we're not going to be Americans. And even though years after that, the Americans had, after they had taken over, had actually tried to indoctrinate our people, and it succeeded for several generations. But today, we understand what really happened, and the Queen left us a legacy of what we can do and what the means, as well as the method we should use to regain our independence as a sovereign nation. So very much mahalo. And the meaning of our celebration or observance on January 17th is that a terrible thing happened, a day of infamy. But this is the day of infamy that we are going to turn around as we work and as our people have pulled together as Lahui.
Mahalo anui a oe, Leon. No kila mau manao. For those amongst our Kanaka out there and for anyone else, it's imperative that we all be clear about the points, the salient points of our history, and that where we are today is based directly on all of the elements, the step 1, 2, 3, 4, and how did we get here? For my kupuna, they told me to make sure I got my education, and they made sure that I did just that. And so once we unlock the treasure trove that is our history, for the good, the bad, and everything in between, a history is history. And so I encourage and implore all of you to avail yourself to not only learning our history, but finding clarity with it, and also knowing what does that mean for our future. And after 130 years of not being in political control, as well as being in control of the economic sustainability and viability of our people and our community, it's high time that we apply these centuries tried and true lessons and understandings that have come with our Kanaka and our existence here in these islands. So everyone, let us avail ourselves to knowing clearly where we come from and what are those building blocks in our history, and let us know what are the steps forward.
One other thing about 2023, but it is not only the 130th anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, but it's also the 30th anniversary of the apology that was issued by the United States, apologizing for the taking of our country and apologizing for what it did in 1893. So ironically, on the 100th anniversary, the United States apologized, and now here we are 30 years later, and we have seen nothing of that apology. That is, the apology was empty. They never followed up. They called for reconciliation, but did not do so. So nothing's changed from the United States side. Since the United States confessed that they had never acquired Hawaii in any lawful way, our people began to speak and say to each other, well, we need to restart our kingdom. The kingdom must still be here. And that's what happened in 1993 after the apology. We started to rise and we started to realize that the Hawaiian kingdom still exists. And all we needed to do is to repopulate that kingdom, reassign ourselves, bring ourselves back into that kingdom. The land and our surroundings never disappeared. We still are the Hawaiian kingdom, and all we need to do is assert them. And that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years, while the United States has never actually acknowledged or made any move to reconcile or resolve the problem. There are also a couple of other dates that are important this year. La Ho'i Ho'i'ea, which is our Hawaiian Restoration of Independence Day, that's July 31st, and La Ku'okoa are both celebrating their 180th anniversary. And these are real celebrations. And as we've seen over the last 30 years, these celebrations have really grown, and now it's widespread. It's one of the biggest celebrations in the islands. And there are motorcades, there are rallies, there are marches, there are picnics, there are campouts, and all prayer vigils, concerts, all kinds of things that are going on to celebrate these two holidays where the Hawaiian Kingdom actually asserts or was recognized as a sovereign nation. The overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom and the subsequent annexation of Hawaii caused not only us to lose our ability to govern ourselves and to actually, our social life was disrupted and our society was disrupted, but also our lands were greatly, greatly mistreated, as well as our lands were actually taken from us. So many of our people became separated from their ancestral lands and from lands that we had presumed and assumed were part of our legacy and our inheritance. To explain all of this and to tell us more, we now go to Maui, where workshop presenter Ke'eaumoku Kapu is standing by. Aloha, Ke'eaumoku.
Aloha Hina, aloha Leon. It's good to see you guys once again.
Could you tell us about the allodial land title workshops that you're presenting throughout our Pai'aina and what they do?
My workshops that I'm doing is to try to help families look at their papers on how they can put their undivided interests together to answer that unanswered question pertaining to whether or not they still have a valid claim to an undivided interest. Anytime when a developer files a quiet title action case, the heir of that quiet title has to prove without the reason of a doubt that he still controls an undivided interest.
Can anyone attend your workshops, and what can they anticipate learning in these workshops?
My workshops involve a lot of work on how we can tie these families to the actual claim that was awarded to them from the time of the great Mahele. And once the names was placed in the indices awards for quiet land titles by the Board of Commissions in the Hawaiian Islands, that is the question we need to ask each other on whether or not these heirs that was awarded Land Commission awards for Makainana still have a valid claim. And all the work that we've done throughout the state of Hawaii, we're now combating these issues right now in the jurisdiction of the courts. And the courts are now starting to realize there is problematic situations when you're looking at absolute title. So my kuleana, or the kuleana of many of our families here on Maui, is trying to infect the many generations on how we need to go forward to find redemption for all the illegalities that have been happening in the past. By providing these workshops, we can help families that are unfamiliar with the jurisdiction that existed in the state of Hawaii when it comes to real property title. There's a lot of work when it comes to trying to help families understand the process, but people are getting it. They're understanding it. And it gives all of us hope to know that we can free ourselves from the bondage that had been happening through the state of Hawaii. We just got to believe that our kupuna and the ali'i at that time, Kauikeoli, Kamehameha III, had put together a title that is unbreakable. And the validity of those titles fall upon the heirs. We just got to make sure that these heirs know and understand and believe that their kupuna left in something for their families and for their generations tomorrow.
No leila, mahalo anu ia oi e ke ea moku no kao mauhana nui, kao mauhana maikai, no ka pono, o ka lahu aloha, me ka pono o ia pai aina. Mahalo, mahalo anui.
After a full year with no solutions, the Red Hill jet fuel contamination of our water, this disaster continues to happen. It's one of the most serious health challenges and risks to not only Hawaiians, but to everyone on Oahu, including military service members and their families. Now questions have started to arise regarding the U.S. military's sincerity or commitment to actually solve this major health crisis rather than to perpetuate it. For news and new details about the situation, we go now to Oahu Water Protector Danny Espiritu for more information. Aloha, Danny. Mahalo for being with us.
Aloha, Kulian and Kumuhina. So great to be with you both today. Mahalo nui for having me.
Danny, why do you think that it's now been over a year since the Red Hill disaster, but nothing really has changed?
What we're seeing, at least just in the last year, is the same tactics that the U.S. Department of Defense continues to employ on a lot of different fronts and in a lot of, particularly with regard to indigenous communities, right? We have the lying, the stalling, the over-bureaucratizing process, creating these information sharing forums or just information sharing committees that don't really have a lot of power or decision-making ability. In the meantime, avoiding things like accountability or transparency. And that's not just been happening over the last year. That's been consistent with the duration of the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility in general, as well as the relationship between Hawaii and the US after the illegal overthrow and supposed annexation through joint resolution with no treaty.
Highly reliable sources have told Free Hawaii News that the U.S. military is more committed to keeping fuel available for their war machine than to making sure Oahu residents have clean and safe water to drink. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. Even if we look at the response of the Department of Defense, even just in the last year, right after the fuel release in 2021, both in May as well as in November, we saw the hiding of video footage that showed just a hemorrhaging out of PVC pipe that led to the poisoning of the Red Hill shaft. It led 93,000 people on the Navy's water system to be exposed to those chemicals. The Department of Defense to this day has not revealed, both to affected families as well as to the Department of Health and the Board of Water Supply, who've all been asking for a release of chemicals used at the facility so that we can test, so that we can test the groundwater and see where those chemicals are spreading, as well as to families so they can actually tell their doctors and be treated. So all of that information has been withheld. Even if we look at what's happened in this last week, 2 weeks since the AFFF spill of carcinogenic forever chemicals that will never attenuate. Yeah, that it will be in our environment and cause harm to generations, centuries from now. To this day, the Navy still is refusing to release the concentration of those chemicals, the specific chemicals that have been spilled, as well as any video footage. They lied about it. And then a release was made sharing that there was actually video footage by Civil Beat. Yeah, Christina Jedra came out with a story that showed that. And then now they're saying, okay, well, there is footage, but we're not gonna release it to the public. And so through all of that, it shows that the priority is not our aina. The priority is not our community. The priority is really conserving the fuel and allowing the DoD to save face in a sense. Even if we look at the defueling date, right? Like the defueling is supposed to happen in July of 2024. The data shows that there will be another catastrophic release before then. We don't have that amount of time. And the strategy and the reason why that is taking so long is because they want to replace the pipeline to be able to drain the facility from the bottom. We were just on a Board of Water Supply meeting with Erwin Kuata. In previous years, the Department of Defense has told Board of Water Supply it would take 4 days to defuel the facility. And now it's expected to take over 2 years. Yeah, so it just doesn't add up. It seems as if they're prioritizing the fuel and perhaps repair of certain parts of that facility over the actual lives of people. They also plan to do a quote unquote like closure in place where they're leaving the facility in the ground, which is incredibly dangerous. Because let's say it's wartime under a different administration, or perhaps even under the same administration, who's to say that the federal government of the United States will not just make an emergency decision because it's wartime to resurrect the facility. And so all of these things kind of show that they're prioritizing their own, just this military industrial complex over the lives of our aina and the lives of our people.
So why does the military keep switching their spokespeople in and out of positions that deal with the public on this issue? Is it just another ploy to avoid responsibility?
That's a great question. To me, it seems so, right? So if we look at this issue specifically, one example is that Rear Admiral Wade, who is the head of the Joint Task Force Red Hill. So he's the head of the defueling process that's happening right now. He just entered that position in September. We had an FTAC meeting, a Fuel Tank Advisory Committee meeting recently in the last month. And folks asked basic questions about the facility to him, and he was not able to answer them. This is the person who's in charge of coming up with the plans and enacting them to defuel as quickly and safely as possible. And he didn't have basic understandings of the facility. So these plans that they've constructed are based on essentially faulty facts. And so this is consistent, I think, across the board. This is not specific to Red Hill. I think this is consistent with the Department of Defense, right? You have folks in positions for 2 or 3 years that can make promises to people. Yeah, say like, we're going to try our best. We're going to do the best that we can. And then in 2 or 3 years, they're taken out and put into another position, and somebody brand new is coming in, and they need to spend years catching up on what the actual issue is. I also don't think it's unique to the military, right? We see that same thing happening with ambassadors. They're only allowed to stay in certain countries for a short amount of time, and then they're switched to something else and someplace else. And so I think it's actually a strategy or a tactic to create this structural amnesia across different US government offices so that people don't, develop this sense of koleana to a place or to a people above what the United States feels as their koleana to the US empire, essentially.
Has the US military contaminated the drinking water of other island nations in the Pacific, or is Hawaii the only one?
Hawaii is absolutely not the only one. The US military and Department of Defense is one of the biggest polluters in the world, if not the biggest polluter in the world. And so with this most recent AFFF or PFAS spill, we've been continuing to develop solidarity with folks in places like Guahan or Guam who already have PFAS, that carcinogenic forever chemical in their aquifer, with folks in Okinawa who've continued to stand with us here. Last week, there was just a report that tested the blood of folks in Okinawa who live near military bases, and they were showing up with PFAS in their bloodstream. And that's consistent, folks on Turtle Island, in different parts of the Pacific, in the Philippines. The US military has continued to, again, prioritize war making above the lands and the people and the waters that are often collateral damage for their training. I mean, look at Koho'olave, and Makua Valley and Puhakuloa, just in our own islands. They've continued to prioritize war and the practice of war above that which feeds us and above our own communities.
What do you think it's going to take to get this resolved?
It's definitely going to take all of us to get this resolved, right? Like, we all drink water, we all rely on water, and so it will really take all aspects of the community to really push this forward. The Navy and the Department of Defense and the U.S. government more broadly has made it abundantly clear that they're not going to do anything without public pressure, right? It took their response to the emergency order put out by the Department of Health was to sue the state. They had active lawsuits against the quote unquote state of Hawaii in response, because they were refusing to defuel and refusing to take responsibility. And so it wasn't until there was public outcry. And so I think it will really take not just folks in Hawaii, but internationally, folks abroad who have said that they love Hawaii, right? Like, this is your time to demonstrate that. We really need to be advocating and getting involved politically, because without pressure, as we have seen, the trend is to lie about things, to deny it, to gaslight people who have been affected, and to delay things with things like ongoing studies. And so we really need, in whatever our spheres of influence are, to be educating ourselves, educating our ohana, and really activating each other around this issue.
What can our viewers do to kokua? How can they help?
There are a number of different ways that people can get involved. One way is to engage where you're at. And so continuing to educate yourself, you can follow Sierra Club Hawaii and Oahu Water Protectors. We've been trying to do as much as we can to keep the public abreast of the issues. I think engaging in the political process, so testifying at things like the Water Commission meetings, at whatever public hearings, there are town hall meetings and things like that. Writing your congressional delegates, as well as other public officials. We can also be engaging, in organizing efforts on the ground. The Shutdown Red Hill Mutual Aid continues to do ongoing distribution of water and supplies to people who are living on the Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam water line, which includes both military families as well as civilians like those in Kapilina beach homes who've been affected, who've not received anything from the military, right? They're part of the 93,000 people who've been poisoned, and yet they have not received the same level of compensation. And so if folks are interested in getting involved on that end, you can as well. And then for folks who are able, you can also donate both to the Shutdown Red Hill Mutual Aid for direct support to those affected families, as well as to Sierra Club Hawaii to support more of the organizing efforts. We're talking about genocide, right? We're jeopardizing Aina, we're jeopardizing the ability to connect with culture, to eat from Aina, we're jeopardizing the health of our communities and of future generations. And so all of these things are at stake when we think about the gravity of this situation with first jet fuel and now PFAS or AFFF, which is, takes it to another level. This is way more hazardous. It's way more it spreads a lot quicker in the groundwater, and really that is a quote unquote forever chemical. So it has the potential to poison our keiki centuries from now and prevent their ability to connect with Aina and to connect with our culture. And so we are talking about, genocide that will last generations. And so really to sit with the gravity of that, and then to be activated, I think, from that place is incredibly important. The jet fuel and chemicals that are released from the facility, right? We have the poisoning of our aquifer, and all throughout our islands, we have punavite, we have springs that come up that traditionally would feed into things like lo'ikalo. And so for us in Kalawao, which is a place that was renowned for lo'ikalo, if we have jet fuel that's coming out of our springs that is then going into our kalo, that is the poisoning of both our kupuna, haloa. We have a genealogical connection to taro through our mele ko'ihonua, through our creation chants. And so you have the poisoning of our elder sibling, kalo, and then you also have the poisoning of us as Kanaka, as us as people. We cannot feed our children, and we cannot feed our people kalo that's been tainted by jet fuel, or kalo that's been tainted by things like PFAS, these chemicals. And so you have the poisoning of land, the poisoning of waters, the poisoning of people, and essentially we have this generational genocide that's begun because of the Navy's both negligence as well as failure to prioritize our lands and people.
Mahalo, Danny. Keep up the good work. Mahalo.
Since the time of the illegal U.S. overthrow, our Native Hawaiian health has continued to be one of our most daunting and most challenging of obstacles that our Kanaka face. In a recent issue of Kawaiola, the Office of Hawaiian Affairs newspaper, Lilinoi Kauhikaua, who is a population health specialist at Papaololokahi, she wrote an article about the effects of colonialism on the long-term health of Hawaiians. We've asked Lilinoi to join us here on Free Hawaii News to tell us more about this. Aloha mai e Lilinoi. Mahalo anui kau kipa ana mai.
Aloha mai kako, aloha Hina, and aloha Leon. So I'm excited to be here. Mahalo for allowing me to be on this session with you folks.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a population health specialist?
I work for Papaololokahi, and a little bit of background on us in case folks aren't familiar. We're the Native Hawaiian Health Board. We provide administrative oversight for the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Improvement Act, and we also oversee the Native Hawaiian healthcare systems on each island, which each provide direct services on their island. And so we work to uplift the healthcare status of Native Hawaiians and their ohana, both here in Hawaii as well as on the continent. And we do this through strategic partnerships programs and public policy. And so we also serve as the body for which federal agencies should enter into consultation on issues of Hawaiian health policy and Hawaiian health care. So me specifically, I work in the department that is called Hale Ho'ona'uau, and we are education, training, and community initiatives. And so I've been with Papa for about 1.5 years now as a population health specialist. And some of my work has really been focused on helping to facilitate community listening sessions on each island, to focus on the topic of substance use in Native Hawaiian communities, as well as cultural healing. And so we've hosted these community listening sessions. We also host a working group on Native Hawaiians and substance use that has a wide reach. I also have an advisory council on culture and addictions for just the work that we're doing in my area, which is addictions, behavioral health, and social justice. Those are the areas I focus on. And so I do a lot of developing trainings and education materials that really support cultural approaches in addictions and behavioral health areas, as well as a lot of other areas of social justice, like specifically right now, it's focused more on incarceration and re-entry. And so these are all areas that really disproportionately impact Native Hawaiians and their ohana.
How significantly are Hawaiians affected by addictions and mental health issues today?
Native Hawaiians have really consistently been overrepresented for over 2 decades in a lot of the areas that I focus on, right? So that's in substance use treatment, in behavioral health services, and incarceration and reentry. And so in substance use services specifically, we see Native Hawaiians being overrepresented within treatment admissions. So right now, Native Hawaiians represent over about 40% of admissions to treatment, while only representing about 20% of our overall Hawaii population. So the percentages that we're seeing are almost twice what the population of Hawaii is for Native Hawaiians. So Native Hawaiians also have amongst the highest incidences of behavioral health problems of all racial and ethnic groups. And this is in areas like depression and suicide and various other behavioral health issues. And so our existing systems of care continue to assign the treatment within these same Western frameworks that have really led to this consistent overrepresentation. And again, this area has been reflected as well in the carceral system, right? So there's the overlapping issue of substance use and mental health with incarceration. So we have our Kanaka Maoli representing over about 40% of the incarcerated population here as well. With some reports being as high as 80% of those incarcerated or accessing reentry services than when they are ready to come back into the community. And so there's this huge discrepancy even in how many Native Hawaiians are incarcerated currently. And that particular issue has a lot to do with the way that ethnicity data is also collected by the Department of Public Safety. They often ask people to say whether, just to choose one ethnicity. So we don't even have really an accurate picture of how many of our Kanaka are incarcerated. We also looked at ways where that overlap is within incarceration, mental health, and addictions. And we've found that between 30 and 40% of Native Hawaiian admission into treatment services are also referred via the criminal justice system. So there's a lot of overlap within these areas of behavioral health, addiction, and incarceration.
How large a role does colonialism play in causing Hawaiians harm regarding their mental and physical health?
Colonization as a whole really has a huge impact on our people today. It really had an impact in shifting the paradigm on Hawaiian family systems and lifestyles. It caused great disruption in our reciprocal relationships that we had between Kanaka, Aina, and spirituality. There was a stark difference in the way that those who began to colonize Hawaii would lay claim and ownership to the land, land that was not theirs to claim. But there was this really big shift, right, in the way that we as Kanaka Maoli existed in our space, reacted and treated one another, how we, had our reciprocal relationships, our worldview of Kanaka, Aina, and spirituality. When colonization began to come into the space, it shifted everything in every way that we knew and understood our own ways and our own lifestyles, with missionary influence and a forced acculturation, shifting from subsistence living to more capitalistic society, criminalization of the Native identity, all of these which have led to a lot of trickle-down impacts and poverty for many Native Hawaiians and many different communities throughout Hawaii.
Can you give us specific examples of how Hawaiians are harmed by colonialism?
When we kind of look at the impact that colonization has had on our Kanaka today and our impacts on our systems, we utilize the ahupua'a as both a metaphorical and a living example to kind of explore this impact. So we've been working on this ahupua'a kind of model with our Indigenous cousins on the continent, organization called White Bison, who created this model called the Healing Forest, as well as we look at the social and cultural determinants of health, the model that was created by Dr. Keawe Koholopula to really understand the way that all of the different impacts historically have impacted our maliola, right, our optimal health. So we look at the ahupua'a as a living, breathing example of a thriving, healthy native system. And we've kind of envisioned the social and cultural determinants of health and their impact into the ahupua'a, knowing that it's a collection of, basically it's, all the systems within the ahupua'a are connected when they're all dependent on the health of one another. So when we have potentially harmful impacts, right, like racial, cultural, historical, intergenerational traumas, coming into our systems, as those being like our risk factors, right? Our disconnection from our Native identity, the criminalization of the Native identity, that shame that started to begin, impacting and penetrating into our ohana systems around that time. That this is impacting our systems as risk factors. And as those risk factors kind of go through our ahupua'a system, they begin to impact each system. They're washed through the waters, right? Basically, they can come down through the waters, kind of similarly to how we think of pollution, right? And so this kind of, for me, when I look at this model, which I wish I could show you folks right now, but when we look at this model, it reminds me of the things that we're dealing with today that impact our water systems, like Red Hill, right? So these are like this pollution that's coming into our systems, impacting each and every system that is interconnected. And then as these negative risk factors start to come into our systems, they're creating layers of unhealthy soil that then the next generation of our people begin to puka out of, right? So we kind of use our land systems to look at understanding how the impacts are manifesting on our people today. So if we kind of look at the way that potentially unhealthy soil is being washed down, like let's say in our lo'i system, right here behind me, right? So if there is pollution or our negative risk factors, right, being washed down into our systems, and they come into our lo'i through, the water that is coming in and feeding our lo'i, and it impacts the soils. And then we have our kalo, which then begins to puka out of that space. And so when our people are born through this, these layers of these risk factors that they begin to puka out of, they can bring with them those intergenerational traumas with them, but not even really know that they're inside, right? And then as they begin to bubble to the surface, these issues can manifest themselves as addiction, as mental health issues, right? Various issues that we see, but those are what is happening on the surface, right? Those are the symptoms. And in order to really heal our people in this way, then we have to look more at how that ma'i, right? How that sickness is getting in and impacting our people. So how are those risk factors coming into our systems? How is that impacting the generations of our people that are born through that soil? And then how do we start to heal it? Because as well, we know that we talk a lot about intergenerational traumas, a lot about trauma, right? How it's impacted our people, which is important for us to understand. But it's also important for us to understand that also passed down intergenerationally are our cultural strengths, our protective factors that our culture provides. Incredible strengths, incredible resilience, and it's there, it's passed down inside of us. And if we can remember that, and we can heal and begin to uplift our people, effectively cleaning our vai of those pollutants, of those risk factors, and uplifting our more protective factors, to really uplift our culture as a way of healing, as a way of thriving, as a way to keep everyone healthy, then that is really kind of what the end goal is for what we're trying to kind of develop in all of our work.
Do you think it's simply a difference between Western ways versus Kanaka ways, or is it something larger and more significant than that?
I really think it's a lot bigger than just as simple as Kanaka ways versus Western ways. It's more about purpose and intention, right? Our Kanaka ways are life ways. They are ways of knowing, ways of doing, ways of being, ways of interacting with one another and the world around us. So our Kanaka ways are rooted in that reciprocal relationship, again, that we have to the Aina as a part of our ohana with our spirituality. And that is what keeps us, continuously connected and healthy. And then that connection again to ourselves. So it's really more than just doing things in a Kanaka way. It's an internal aspect. It's that connecting to those ancestral memories that are inside of us, feeding our spirit through that connection.
You wrote in your article that a cultural approach is best to reducing harm to Hawaiians. Can you describe how a cultural approach would work?
So I mentioned that earlier that Native Hawaiians are disproportionately impacted by the issues of substance use and in behavioral health, as well as incarceration. And so this really illustrates the need for us to change the way that services are currently being provided to Native Hawaiians. Our research also tells us that re-envisioning treatment to our Native people is more effective, right? Utilizing cultural methodologies, cultural reconnection, all those things that speak to Native perspectives is really more influential in creating positive health outcomes for our Native people. And cultural approaches in this work really provide those pathways of healing that for many, that reigniting, right? That reigniting of something inside of us that for many maybe had been disconnected for a really long time. Many of us maybe have been going through life, right, trying to really survive when everything kind of just feels so impossible. And maybe many of us have turned to substances as an escape from that kind of a space, a way to kind of oftentimes numb the traumas of our past and escape that constant survival mode that we find ourselves in. And then when we find something that speaks to us, right, not just us in our conscious mind, but speaking to us really internally, it's that resonance, or really that which resonates with us inside, basically, that speaks to us, that's going to help us on our own healing journey, reigniting that connection really to our cultural strengths and our protections, the protections that our ancestors have passed down to us to really care for us. And then when we find that for ourselves, it really makes a difference. And I'm sharing this because I personally am on my own healing journey from dealing with substance use as well as behavioral health issues. And for me, the healing was heavily rooted in returning home to Hawaii and reconnecting culturally. And so I'm, very passionate about this work, about the need to reconnect and the need to reignite that within ourselves to really find what healing looks like to us. We just released it's called Ehuiana na Moku. It's a harm reduction toolkit for Native Hawaiian communities. It's free for folks to download. And it covers a lot of what we talked about. It is providing a way for cultural reconnection for individuals, all people, all of our Kanaka, regardless of whether they use substances. And so our approach to kind of harm reduction was really rooted in the concept of ho'i kapiko, right? Because harm reduction in its essence is a Western term. However, when we think about it from a cultural aspect, it really calls for us to center ourselves in our cultural understanding of, basically just center in us and the way that we've been taught to interact with one another and the world around us. So centering in a cultural understanding of just of ways of knowing, ways of doing, ways of being. And so we've provided within this toolkit really a way for our communities to connect to different cultural learning pathways. We've kind of provided an outline of how does hula, how does hoiva'a, how does oli, how do these practices connect to spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional well-being? What are all the aspects of these things that can help us heal? And so I'm really excited that the toolkit is available. It's free, you can download it, you can access digital copies of it. We have trifold brochures and different types of printable materials that are available for use of the toolkit. And also we are providing additional training on areas of the toolkit on the cultural pathways, a cultural approach to harm reduction, as well as some of the other drug awareness that we want to get into communities so that our communities are aware of the influx of fentanyl into substances and being aware of what that means and being able to have access to life-saving naloxone in the event of an overdose, which can help to reverse an overdose. So we really want to make sure that these ways of keeping our communities and our loved ones safe are available to our Kanaka communities.
Why are systematic changes rather than individual changes so important for healing and well-being?
Systematic changes and really systemic changes are needed because the issues that our people are experiencing today have a huge impact, not only on the individual, but on, again, the whole ohana and the whole community. And we can't really expect to kind of take one person out of their family or their community and be like, okay, we're gonna just take you over here, we're gonna heal you, and then we're gonna put you right back into the same kind of environment without any healing to the ohana or the community. And that individual is most likely going to become sick again, right? Or maybe turn to substance use again, because we haven't done that work to heal that space. And this is another thing we utilize the ahupua'a model for, because it's like taking one kalo out of that potentially, unhealthy lo'i. I'm saying like, okay, instead of looking around to the other kalo, right? Our other kalo sick? Is the whole lo'i sick? How is that ma'i getting into that lo'i? So if we just take that one kalo out, take that one person out, heal it, put it back in, they're going to get sick again. We haven't done that work. We haven't done that work to heal everything. And so in terms of, and this is really kind of often like this, right? This is what we're seeing with incarceration, as well as like people who are having to go to other islands for finding treatment services. They're being removed from their environment to be healed, and then they go right back to the same environment. So we really have to do that, that extra work to heal. It's a kako thing, right? Like this is the foundations of how we are as a people. It's a kako thing, and healing needs to be approached in the same way. Instead of healing from in many Western ways is very individualistic, it's very egocentric. Instead of looking at the different perceptions of self that we have as an indigenous culture, we're more ecocentric or sociocentric, like more defining ourselves in relation to our social connections with those around us, as well as connection to the land. That's how we understand ourselves in the larger in a larger kind of worldview, right? So in that respect, we also want to look at those changes when we're trying to create ways of healing for our people, that it's a kako thing. We all have to heal.
Tell us why living and practicing the Hawaiian culture is so important to building wellness for Hawaiians.
So I think that living and practicing Hawaiian culture is very much a way, again, to reignite something inside of us that for many of us has been disconnected for a while, or hasn't had a chance to, many of us haven't had a chance to learn. And I think one of the greatest kind of examples of this is what we saw on Mauna Kea, really this kahea, right? This kahea to all of our people that brought us together and inspired so many to continue their reconnection to culture, coming together for a common purpose for the betterment of the lahui. And so when we think about the pride, right? The sense of purpose, the resonance that begins to build in someone when they begin to connect and learn about their own culture, about their history, it begins to create this furthered sense of pride, this sense of caring about ourselves as well as others, this sense of learning our own identity, learning who we are. As I was on my own healing journey, it was a long journey, and honestly, it will never be over. I will always continue to heal, but more and more as I've seen people reconnect to their cultures and find a way through that healing, I can see how the inspiration begins to build inside of them. They feel as though they have that sense of purpose, that place of belonging, that understanding the sense of their sense of place and understanding potentially why they had been brought on this journey in the first place. I see many of our people today reconnecting to culture and becoming inspired to be peer leaders, peer navigators to help our other Kanaka that are going through similar situations, you know, again, approaching things together, working together to really center ourselves in our culture and that which brings us strength. And this is not just Hawaiian culture, right? Like we always encourage everyone to explore all parts of themselves. We're complex people and we often have many different cultures within us, and it's important for us to reconnect to all of our cultures and to understand what makes us as a people unique. You know, what are the cultural strengths that have been passed down within our various cultures? Knowing who you are is incredibly important to understanding how best you can thrive as a person.
No laila e lilinoe mahalo anui ia oe no kau hananui a me kau mauhana maikai. Mahalo anui no keia manawo kako. Aloha.
We thank you for joining us here for this episode of Free Hawaii News. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and we thank all of our guests for being here.
Ai a o komawa mahalo anui ho ikeia ia oko e no hoa kipa ikeia polokalamu o Free Hawaii News. Komawa aloha ho ikeia ia oko no keia makaiki ho. Ahui ho kako. Aloha.
We hope you enjoyed this month's episode of Free Hawaii News. Mahalo for watching. There's a new show every month, so this program will air several more times this month. You can view it anytime on Olelo's on-demand site or on YouTube. See you next time. Ahui ho, aloha aina.
Free Hawaii Broadcasting Network.